Joining us on the program, Nicole Cyrille. She is an audio description narrator, a member of the SAG AFTRA Negotiating Committee, chair of the Los Angeles Performers with Disability Committee. I appreciate you joining us. Right about now, I think, or maybe like 20 minutes ago, is when the picket lines opened up in L.A., I believe. They're have just closed in New York. Full disclosure, I'm a member of SAG AFTRA, just to say that so that people know my biases. But I think if people are paying attention, I think they would have picked up on that. Nicole, give us we've talked about this on the program, but give us a brief rundown of what the major issues are for SAG AFTRA. We can expand that a little bit to the extent that you're aware of in terms of the WGA, but just give us those sort of like the bullet points that are the big issues.
Okay. Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. And, what we're really asking for is dignity and respect and to be treated fairly in our industry and to continue to be able to have a career in this industry. To that end, we need to raise our minimums. Our minimum pay right now, the raise that they're offering us at this point, would mean that we would be making in real dollar value 5% less than we made in 2020. Our dollar would go so much less than it did then, and it's already difficult to feed our families on what we make. As you heard, I've seen, you had Andrew Leeds on the show, and I've seen you guys talk about the fact that 26% or $26,000 is what we need to qualify for healthcare, and 87% of our members do not qualify for healthcare.
It's insane.
And talk, if you will, about how the industry has changed. Back when I was doing sitcoms, it was very straightforward stuff. You had, at that time, 5 networks, the studios, and I was doing this when the FinCIN laws were rescinded, and basically, studio would hire you. They would sell the show to the network. The network would play it for, if it got to 4 seasons or 5 seasons, the studio would then sell it in syndication. If it went on like that, you would get residuals. And so if you did a show that was getting residuals, it would take you through the lean times because, I'm known as the dad, and I'm not going to, I may not get another job because I'm so well known as the dad. I can get one job here for a day or two. But that all changed with streaming, and walk us through that change.
Sure. So as you mentioned, we used to have linear network TV where we had 20 some episodes a season. And then you had the summer off, and maybe you did a movie, maybe you didn't, maybe you took summer off with your kids, but you were able to sustain through residuals and that, as you mentioned, magical syndication. Where we are now is that magical syndication is move over to streaming. Mm-hmm. And as they do, well, we don't know what streaming is going to pay, so please help us out. That's not how you run a business. You take on that risk, but they put it on us. So now with streaming, we don't get those residuals. And I hope you guys have seen a lot of actors that you recognize have been very open on social media now with their residual checks for pennies and some for negative pennies. So now when it moves over to streaming, we're not making money. The cast of Stranger Things has other jobs, and it's one of the biggest shows on Netflix. So one of the key things that we're asking for, or demanding, I should say, is revenue share. We're building your platforms. We are the reason that your platforms are growing and worth billions of dollars, and we're getting pennies.
What has the studio's kind of explanation been to you guys in the sense of their lack of transparency about how many people are actually watching this stuff?
Right. So they have never been upfront with that when it comes to streaming, and they really haven't communicated with us on this issue. So when we went into negotiations, they dealt with the smaller issues. And as Fran has spoken in interviews saying, we thought we were going to deal with the smaller issues and then get to the bigger things. They refused to engage. They absolutely refused to engage on this topic. We're asking for 2% of revenue share, 2%. It's such a small number for them, and they refuse to give us that information.
And it seems to me, there's a lot of different ways in which they could do this. They certainly know if they don't want to share with people how well a specific show is doing, which they're probably, I have no doubt that it's less than people generally think. Stranger Things, extremely popular show, but it's not MASH from 1987 or something. And I mean, it may be, but highly unlikely. And so they have their own metrics as to what the value of any given show is. But we know what their revenue is on any given year, right? Because it's X time, whatever, it's $10 a month, let's say, for Netflix. They've got 1 million subscribers.
Right.
Then we know that it's like $120 million a year or something. Has the, like, how much has the discussion been like, okay, look, you don't want to tell us what the numbers are because you're afraid that's going to tank your stock options, and Sarandos or whomever it is, that's how you get paid. Fine. You can maintain that fiction if you want, but you need to come up with a system that will obscure, and you can make it up if you want. If you want to say, like, but this is the minimum of the share from all the shows on your platform. You divide it up that way. If you want to give a bonus to some, that hit some benchmark that you make up in your head. I mean, can they do that? Or are they just refusing to just share this money in any way, shape, or form?
Well, yes, they're refusing to share this money in any way, shape, or form, but they already have the analytics with third-party companies, and we've been open about it. There's a company called Parrot Analytics, and these platforms hire Parrot to analyze what a show is bringing to their platform. So they have all the metrics. They know if we put this on, if we put Friends on for this month, that's going to be the big boost to get subscribers. Then we can pull it off and we can put it back on X amount of months later to then again get that boost. They know all that. And using companies like Parrot, we would have access to that information, and therefore we would be able to equitably divide it up based on performance. And when you're talking about MASH, that was based on the commercial ad revs, right? So we're just shifting where that revenue is coming from for how we do that calculus, and they're refusing to engage.
What's incredible is that this data should be even more straightforward than like the Nielsen rate, or whatever the systems were previously to gauge viewership that would then drive advertising, because all of this data has to be tabulated, I mean, as easily as possible, just given the fact that it's all computerized at this point. Well,
they know, but it's really a question of like, if the Nathan Fielder show doesn't necessarily have a lot of viewers, but there's a lot of people writing about it, then you subscribe to the service because the service is in there. So there's a lot of lost leader in this, but nevertheless, there is a metric for this. They know the value of these shows to them. That's how they run their business. It doesn't necessarily ascribe to X number of viewers. It's some combination. Gotcha. So let me ask you this other question. There was a time where the producers were largely, not exactly, but their incentive structure and their business model was aligned. But now you have like old Hollywood models and these sort of more tech models with the streaming. Is this, from your perspective, an opportunity where they're going to have less sort of durability in hanging out, like where in terms of like this, this is going to be a really long, I think, battle. But their cohesion, do you anticipate that they're going to start maybe to pull apart a little bit? Because Netflix may have a different agenda than Amazon, and Amazon may have a different agenda than Hulu because of the way that their models are different. And they all have a very different model than, say, like, I don't know, maybe Paramount, unless, depending on which one is put which eggs in which basket.
Well, you said something a minute ago that really speaks to this, is that they're working for their shareholders. They're not, the model has changed to that degree that they're looking for their bottom line to make their bonuses for their shareholders. The audience doesn't play as much of a role, and our participation doesn't play as much of a role. So when you talk about these streamers and network having a different business model and will they split, I don't know. We're not in their room. We can't hear them talk. There are reasons that makes sense, and there are reasons that they might not choose to do it. But when you talk about how long this strike might go, if we were back in linear, we know that if we're not back to work by Labor Day, we're not having a fall network. We're not having a fall season. And when you're talking about streaming, which puts us into a whole nother issue that we're working on in the room, it's that they're not functioning under a set structure. So you have actors who are leads on shows that work 6 to 10 episodes, and they may not go back to work for 18 months, but they're held on exclusivity. So that makes it harder for us to make a living because they're exclusive and they're only working 10 shows in 2 years. But also it changes where their needs are for how fast they want to end this strike.
Right.
Because we don't know what their do they value Oscar season? Do they value the Christmas movie? Do they value linear network, fall season? At this point, we're waiting to find out.
And is one of the terms, I mean, that issue of like shows, the way that they develop shows and the way they commit to shows has changed dramatically from the linear days, as you call them. But the holds on actors and frankly on writers hasn't seemed to have changed at all. And there's different issues in terms of like actors and writers because, if you can get an actor, you're going to shoot with them next week. You got them. They're on, with a writer, you need a certain more lead time and anticipation associated. So slightly different issues. But for SAG AFTRA, is this question of like exclusivity or terms or pay to play, are these in the mix as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Holding actors on exclusivity, like I said, for up to 18 months is untenable. We can't afford to feed our families on that. Right. So that is absolutely part of our negotiation. Again, it's dignity and respect, treating us with dignity and respect. Look, as you mentioned, I'm the chair of the Performers with Disabilities Committee in Los Angeles, and I'm a voiceover artist, partly because they don't hire people with disabilities. Like we're 25% of the population. We are 3% of scripted characters. Of that 3%, and I'm about to tell you, only 2% of those are played by disabled actors, and that's because things are getting better. That's how small the number is of getting better. And a lot of times you'll hear, well, they're not written. Okay, it doesn't have to be written. Does it matter if the three of us sitting here, if any of us are disabled? No. I mean, I am. I walk with a cane or sometimes use a wheelchair, but it doesn't have any bearing on sitting here doing this show. So they don't look at that. They don't look at those opportunities. And that just is the canary in the coal mine about dignity and respect and how they don't treat us with it, right? When we talk about audio description, the voiceover work that I do, because people with disabilities get more voiceover work, audio description is absolutely covered under our contract, but the AMPTP refuses to acknowledge it, and we are insisting that they do.
Let's talk briefly about interim agreements. There's a little bit of, and this may be a little bit of inside baseball, but I don't think it's too inside baseball. In fact, I just got an email as a member of SAG AFTRA that there's going to be a webinar tomorrow, I think, about interim agreements. But explain what these are, because there are, folks have been publicly saying, asking questions like, is this helpful? Explain to us what interim agreements are, and then let's talk about, the to the extent that there's controversy as to the questions of, is it helpful? Does it maintain solidarity, et cetera?
Absolutely. So the interim agreement is a contract that can be used right now, and it's the terms from the last time we pushed across the table. So the last package that we said, here's our responses, here's where we want it, the 11% minimums increase, for example. That's what that interim agreement is. So when we say you can apply for an interim agreement, our staff will then go through the applications and make sure that none of the projects are connected to the AMPTP. They are truly independents. And when they go through that, then they go through our normal vetting process to get approved by SAG. And then they have an interim agreement. And they're working under the contract that we put across the table to the AMPTP that they refused on the final night, July 12th. So they're working under that interim agreement with all the pieces there. The change in exclusivity, the revenue share, all of those pieces are included in that. So that shows the industry that these contracts are tenable.
They're not so onerous that they can't be implemented. Well, what of the argument that when you do that, though, because they may be independent, but ultimately they're going to sell to somebody, and they're going to end up being on, running on Hulu or Amazon or Apple or Netflix or whatever it is. What about like sort of the calculation that it decreases leverage because it's providing content for these platforms, and B, it makes it harder to maintain solidarity amongst all of SAG AFTRA workers, because they're not all, you're talking about a limited number of people, and there are a certain amount of like stars and names who are not going to be on the picket lines because they're going to be working on these productions.
Well, I understand that. And I think that's just from lack of information. And to that end, we probably should have had this webinar a little earlier than we are having it tomorrow. But keep in mind, the revenue share is additive. So we have also asked for increases in streaming residuals. All of that applies. So if and when they do sell those projects to streaming, those residuals, that revenue share still applies. So if they choose to buy it, they then choose to air it. They are agreeing to those pieces that we put in. They can't just air it under the old terms.
The streaming platforms themselves are essentially agreeing to the terms, and they're basically showing that we can theoretically agree to these terms, or not even theoretically, I guess, literally agree to these terms for this amount of shows. And so we have the ability to do this stuff.
Absolutely. And these are truly independent projects. So yes, there are names that work, but there's more so not names that are working. Your actors that, are the journeyman, the struggling actor, they're working on these projects. Imagine, you have one name on a film, maybe two, and all the rest of those actors are working. All the rest of those writers, are getting paid for their script. All the rest of the crew that is put out of work right now because we're on strike, they're getting jobs from this. So, when we talk about the residual change, my neighbor is an actor that you would all recognize from shows you love, like Superstore. And he's slinging pizza because of how much our industry has changed.
Yeah, it's amazing. And just talk for a moment. We have recently had a Yahtzee members that was on live productions unionized. But the idea that the WGA is out there on the picket lines with the actors. It's been a long time since SAG AFTRA been real. I mean, for an extended strike like this, I think we're now at like 40 years or something, maybe more actually. And the writers 15 years ago or so, but the writers it seemed to me, were not as cohesive as they are today. And just the sort of the labor movement itself, at least within the context of Hollywood, was not as cohesive as it is today. On Friday of last week, the producers met with the writers, and there was it really felt like they were trying to sort of like drive a wedge, like force the writers to say that we will not go back until SAG AFTRA is resolved, which it seemed to me, and this was all leaked by the producers, it seemed to me to be a technique to try and create dissent within the WGA. What is your sense of both the solidarity that you're seeing from the writers and just sort of like how much solidarity you're seeing just within both unions?
Yeah, it's amazing. We haven't had a big strike on this contract, or any strike, since the 80s. And when you talk about the writers and the actors out together, that was 1960. That's when we got residuals, pension, and health. So it's been a long time, and they were very powerful when it happened. The playbook of the AMPTP seems to be to try to divide. They did that with their offers to us, try and divide our groups. And as the writers have said, we're the same. We're not making a deal that leaves any of our membership behind. We're not going to make a deal that helps most of our union, but not all of our union. And they try to divide us now with the writers, and it's not going to work. It's such a beautiful thing. First of all, from our group, Fran Drescher is an incredible leader. What I love about Fran is that she's doing the right thing simply because she believes it's the right thing. It doesn't matter what she thinks it may or may not do to her career. It is literally to help everyone. And Duncan Crabtree Ireland is incredible to watch as our lead negotiator. So our negotiating committee is in lockstep with each other constantly. Our unity is fierce. When they tried to separate us by groups, by offering certain things to some parts of our membership and not to others, we all stood together. You know, as I mentioned, I'm very active in audio description, and we're all in that together, even though I'm the main person on our committee about it. And you have to ask, just as a side note about audio description, it's like, if you were to hire me to read to your kids, would you pay me less because your kids are blind? That's what the AMPTP thinks, right? So where's their respect for just individuals? Now, as far as on the line, it is incredible. You see videos and photos of us laughing and smiling and doing karaoke on the picket line. It's not because we want to be on strike. This was a last call. This is because we had to. We had no option. So what do? We're making the best of it. And the writers, you know, some writer friends of mine tell me this shot in the arm of just the sheer volume of actors that have joined on the line, it's creating more of a unity. And I think the more they let us create that bond, the harder it's going to be for them to break us ever. I think this is creating a whole new hot labor summer, you know, a whole new community in our industry that is going to be hard to break moving forward.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, I've experienced it firsthand, just personally, but it hadn't really occurred to me the implications of it on a broader scale. That opportunity, just you got writers and actors socializing in a way that, you know, writers don't socialize that much. But Nicole Cyrille, audio description narrator, a member of SAG AFTRA negotiating committee and chair of the Los Angeles Performers Disability Committee. Thanks so much for your time today. People can go to sagaftrastrike.org, and it will provide information as to where the picket lines are. I can say, just as having been on those picket lines, when people drive by and honk their horns, people, you really can't appreciate how much the people who are picketing enjoy people blaring their horns, because it just amplifies their voices. So go out there, you know, bring a pizza or some water, or just honk your horn. But I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.